Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you're located. Welcome. Today there will be no Vesa. He's enjoying his well-deserved holiday vacation time somewhere, I think on the countryside of Finland. I saw a picture come by on Twitter where he was sitting in the middle of a forest doing some important things behind his laptop. So it will be me, Erwin, Paolo, Patrick, Jax, and Mark Stokes today that will hopefully entertain you for an hour with some new things to show you, some topics to discuss, and hopefully we still have some time for Q&A too in the end if there's any questions pops up. Indeed, Paolo, he's in Lapland, in the northern part of Finland. So again, short reiteration of what we're talking about today and what today is. This is the special interest group about general development. So today we focus on everything but SPFX effectively. So there might be some JavaScript popping up here and there. There might be some PowerShell popping up. There might be some C# code popping up. But it's more generic SharePoint development topics that we talk about. And this ranges from pure code to sort of non-coded solutions, including Flow, for instance, and that's why Jax is here today too. Again, I would like to stress this slide very much. This is not a game where a few people out there in the world provide all the information and all the goodies for you to consume. This is a game of us. We play this game together. And we would love it if you help us make this even better and by contributing on GitHub. This can be done by providing code samples, demo solutions, patents, but also by answering questions. You might have noticed if you browse around on the GitHub repos, there's a lot of issues out there. We really, unfortunately, don't have the time to answer them all. We do this all in our free times, after work, in the weekends, during vacations. It would be wonderful if you see a question and you have an answer to it, please reply to it. We really would love you to be part of this whole community and help us to make this one become even better and even bigger. So what we're talking about today is Mark Stokes will do a demo related to Flow, which will come a bit later. And then me and Paolo will talk about some changes we're making to the P&P provisioning engine that are upcoming. And those changes, I'll explain why we're making those changes and where we're going with those. And hopefully you will like them and hopefully you think they're useful. Coming back to the typical statistics, in June we had 800,000 views on the documentation. Also keep in mind that the documentation is something you can help Microsoft with. If you navigate to a page within the docs.microsoft.com, you will notice an edit button on the top right. If you click on that one, you'll navigate to GitHub. You can make a pull request, you can make a change. Your name will be on that page as one of the authors. This will be your 5 minutes of fame. So if you find something that is wrong, in the old days, you can just say, there was a discussion in the end, say, this is wrong. Now you can actually update it and change it. So that's a really good thing. So this is a living site. This is not a static thing that will be released once a year. This is a living thing. So please, 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 again, contribute. Help Microsoft to make this better, because this will only make your life easier too, and your fellow colleagues and friends. If you have any issues with Office 365 and SharePoint in general, and it actually doesn't matter that much what, there is a GitHub repo where there's an issues list. The URL AKMS SPDEV-issues. The issues, you will notice that you get redirected to a site or a GitHub repo called SPDEV-docs. Let that name not confuse you. The engineering team keeps track of these issues and marks them up with the correct labels and forwards them to the people responsible to have a look at and potentially fix the issues you have with the products. So please use this list as your way to get in touch with the engineering team and get in touch with Microsoft and tell them what's wrong, what is a bug, where is an issue, etc. This is your way to give feedback. this is our big success number right now. We get a lot of positive feedback on the SharePoint Starter Kit. People really seem to appreciate what we've been doing here. This is now also a repo. So there is the AKMS SPDev Starter Kit. This repo allows you, we would love it if you come up with wonderful new features there and makes this grow. Connected to the SPDev, to the Starter Kit, is the changes to the provisioning engine that Paolo and I will talk about later. So this is a great way to get up and running, to learn about how to use solution packages based on SPFX, how to do somewhat more advanced scripting with PowerShell to create your site collections, etc. But there's more news about this and in relationship to the provisioning engine coming later in today's talk. This is big news. SharePoint 2019, the preview came out. You can download it. It's a relatively minor download of 3.9 gigabyte. So make sure you don't do this on a 4G connection. But it's out there for you to download and install. Quite some things made it into 2019 that we are used from now already for a while in SharePoint Online. Some things didn't make it. So, for instance, site designs and hub sites and the site collection scoped app catalog didn't make it. Tenant properties also did not make it. Although if you really are a bit creative, you could come up with a similar technology when it comes to tenant properties by sort of using a property bag somewhere in your tenant. For those asking which version of the SharePoint framework will be in there, it will be 1.4. So yeah, it's a bit older than what is out there in Office 365 already, but it's still more capable than what is available in SharePoint 2016. So download it, install it, play with it, and give Microsoft feedback. That was my introduction. So today's topics and demos. First, Mark Stokes, so I will give him the stage in a minute. And after that, me and Paolo, where we'll talk about it. And then maybe, Jax, we can put you in between Mark and Paolo and me. So if you go straight after Mark, and you said you needed like 10 minutes, correct?
Yeah, just showcasing the same general updates. So I thought I would just continue with you.
Yeah. Okay.
So people don't get confused with all the demos and stuff.
Right. Okay. Cool. So if we do that, sorry.
Yeah, I'll be as quick as possible.
Perfect. I mean, we should be good in time today. I think I talk less than Vesa. I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So Mark. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Owen.
I'll stop sharing and I'll mute.
Perfect. Just checking, can everybody hear me okay? Is it coming through nice and clearly?
Yep. I can hear you just fine.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to present today. Today's on the call who don't know me. My name is Mark Stokes. I work for a company called Authentication. I'm a former MVP, doing lots of sessions like this. Recently, I've been getting heavily involved in Microsoft Flow, absolutely loving it. I think it's one of the better tools that Microsoft put out there. It's not perfect, it's getting better and better all the time, but it's really changed the way that I'm working on my development pipeline. I am a developer by trade, but I'm actually starting to build more and more business processes using Flow. Over the past few weeks, I've been sharing a lot more of what I've been doing. So if you follow me on Twitter, you'll probably see I've been sharing a few templates and updates on some of the flows I've been creating. One of the things I find really interesting is really around the automating of business processes. I work in a small business, so the more we can automate, the better we are. And Flow is just, it's blowing me away how easy it is to do this. So yeah, I posted this link up recently. Shaq saw it. And asked me to present. So basically what we're looking at doing today is taking some SharePoint list data and dynamically building a Mailchimp mail campaign, sending it out through Mailchimp and doing that fully autonomously. I first decided I wanted to do this. I send out a number of newsletters, one for the SharePoint user group, a couple for my own business, etc. And it's quite a time-consuming process when it's it was quite repeatable. So I went into Flow and I thought, fantastic, how good, there is a Mailchimp connector in there, and that should let me do it. So I first went and explored what the options are, and one of the options is a new campaign. Excellent. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite go far enough. It lets me create a new campaign, but it doesn't allow me to define a template. It doesn't allow me to put in any dynamic content unless I attach it to an RSS feed. And it doesn't allow me to send the campaign out either. So it's useful for what it does, but it didn't go far enough for what I wanted it to do. So I started exploring some other ways of doing it, and that brought me back to the HTTP action. So a lot of what I'm going to show you is based around that. So Flow is very much positioned around a tool that consumerizes business processes, trying to bring some no-code / low-code solutions in. In some cases, we do need a bit more of a techie ability, and this is one of those flows where we do need a little bit more technical knowledge on how we do it. So I thought it'd be interesting to show how I kind of get around that. The nice thing is this shows you that actually if you do reach limitations with any of the connectors, there is generally a fallback option that you can do, and you can pretty much achieve a heck of a lot more than you might actually think. So first of all, what we'll do, let's just have a quick look at some of the content I want to put into my newsletter. So my monthly newsletter is just going to send out a load of updates of the Office 365 roadmap, the Azure roadmap, and the Azure updates. So I have these loaded into my SharePoint list. So here's all of the Office 365 roadmap. Now you might be wondering how I get these in and how I manage to tweet these out so quickly when they come on. You can probably imagine the answer to that is a Microsoft Flow. So I have a flow that connects up to RSS feeds, grabs new items off the Azure roadmap and the Azure updates, and loads them into my SharePoint list. Then that automatically triggers another flow that goes out and tweets them, so I get those updates nice and quick. I also put them into Microsoft Teams for my teams to share, and I just share that information around as wide as I can. Again, Flow just makes it so easy for me to do that. My one request to Microsoft is that we can have the Office 365 roadmap and RSS feed rather than a downloadable CSV. That would make my life a lot easier. Anyway, so that's the data that we want to put in. So we want this dynamic content going into our newsletter. My newsletter should bring the 5 most recent versions of, the 5 most recent items in these lists and include them in my What's New newsletter. The nice thing is Mailchimp does have a very nice API. So if we go in and have a quick look at the API reference for Mailchimp, it's a nice RESTful API, or mostly RESTful. We can see in here the coverage here is a lot wider than we have through the connector. So I can create campaign folders, I can create campaigns, so create a new campaign, send a campaign from here as well. So these are all the bits that are really of use to me to make a fully automated task. I could even use Flow to pick up on conversations as well, so if somebody replies to it, so I can do a lot more around this if I wanted to. At the moment, it just sends the campaign out. The other thing I had problems with is actually sending my dynamic HTML to Mailchimp. That's something that wasn't particularly easy to do. However, that can be achieved using the templates feature of Mailchimp. So again, I can just upload a template to Mailchimp. And one of the nice options in here is it lets me pass in the HTML. Okay, so I can generate my HTML in Flow, send it to Mailchimp as a template, then I can create a campaign based on that template and send the campaign. So I can achieve every step I want to do. So if we have a quick look at the flow. What we have here, so I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see what happens. I'll run over the basic tasks that happen here, and then I'll go into them in a bit more detail. So first of all, I want my flow to run every month, so I can just set it to run on a monthly interval. Could do that bi-weekly if I wanted to, just by changing values. And then what I do is the different branches I have in here, or the parallel flows, these are just loading the SharePoint list items, and they're generating the HTML snippets for the sections of my newsletter. I could just stack these on top of each other. When you come to business processes like this, I don't really care how long it takes my flow to run, because it's just going to run autonomously in the background. However, for me, it's just a lot neater to use parallel branches, so I can go off and get the 3 set of items at the same time. And then when all of those complete, I can generate my HTML, and then I can upload it to Mailchimp and send it. I have 15 minutes for this demo. You'll probably see it's quite simple how I achieve this, so hopefully I can fill that time up. The most complicated bit of interacting with REST APIs and external systems, if you're doing it through HTTP, is actually the authentication side of things. If you're a developer and you try to connect to any sort of API, you'll know that generally is the most painful side of things. Mailchimp has some good information on here. So if you go into the authentication section, there's actually two different methods of authenticating on the API. One is passing in an API key using basic authentication, and the other option is OAuth 2. I actually use OAuth 2 in this demo, but I'm not going to go into the details. I've got getting my authentication token because, quite frankly, it's a bit of a pain. Well, it's not a pain. Basically, I bring up Postman. I make one request to an endpoint. That gives me my access token, and then I just store that in a variable. The nice thing with Mailchimp is those tokens last forever. They don't expire them. I would say that's not a nice thing because there's a potential security risk there if someone gets hold of it. But it'd be quite easy to do. I could just put another HTTP action in here, post off to get my access token, save that in a variable. So I could do it on a run-by-run basis if I wanted to. And for simplicity, I just copy it in here. I am going to put a blog post together over the next couple of weeks of how I actually get that auth token. So I'll fill that gap because that probably is going to be the biggest barrier. The other option that you have is basic authentication. So you can actually just form your HTTP request, and in the body you just pass in any string as a username and an API key as the password, and then that will authenticate you as well. API keys are very easy to get to. You go into your account settings in Mailchimp. You click on Extras, go to your API keys. You generate a new API key, and then you can use it. And don't worry, I will be disabling this API key at the end of this session. So we take that API key, we would make a call, sorry, that becomes the password that we use in our HTTP request. Okay, so basically I just store that in a variable here. Now I'm actually starting to use compose actions instead of variables. So I'm kind of differentiating the two. I don't know why, I just feel comfortable using compose. So any areas where I'm setting text values like this that I'm not expecting to change, I'm using compose to use them. I just find it a nicer way of doing it. And then variables are anything I might want to change. So I'd normally do this in a compose action now. The other thing I have here is my email HTML template. So this is the HTML template for my newsletter. Mailchimp likes to generate lots of HTML. So that is the HTML from an email campaign. So you can either generate that newsletter HTML yourself, or a very nice, easy way of doing it is go in, manually create yourself a campaign, send it, and then once you've sent it, it gives you the ability to view the HTML source, and you can just copy that HTML source directly out of Mailchimp and put it into a string variable. Okay. The nice thing is, and I'm a little bit surprised about this, I'm pleasantly surprised, a string variable in Flow, it lets me put a very, very long string in there. That's a long string. Okay, so I actually don't know how far that will let me go, but this seems to work. Okay. Now what I do as well, so this is a template, as I said, if I just zoom in a little bit. Then what I do, I take the area where I want my dynamic content to be, and I just tokenize it. So from the HTML I paste in here, I'm actually cutting out the section for my items, just replacing it with a token. Okay, and my token format is curly brace, name of the token, close the curly braces. And then later on, what we're going to do is we're just going to replace that token with the actual HTML for that section. So this is going to show the Office 365 roadmap. And then if I scroll up, I should have somewhere else Azure Updates as a token. Okay, so this just becomes a nice HTML template that I can reuse over and over. Let me try it there. So I have my HTML template, I have my auth token, and then I go through and I process my, basically what I'm doing here is generating the HTML that I want to push into my newsletter. So first of all, I create a variable. Now I do use a variable here because I'm going to add to it as I go on. So I just have an opening div, could be an opening table, div, however you want to do it. And then I go off to SharePoint and I get items. Okay, so I'm getting items from my my SharePoint site, my Azure Updates list, and I want to order it by publish date descending, and I just want 5 items, so I can just put my filters in there. Then I do a apply to each. So for each item I get back from SharePoint, so I use a compose here. I'm not going to edit this, and I just generate the HTML for that particular SharePoint item. So I generate a anchor tag, put in the link, put in the title, put in the description, and I add in the publish date as well. I'd probably replace this and just use an expression here where I can actually format the date that I get back from SharePoint, so it's a little bit more friendly than a UTC date. And then I append that HTML to my string. Okay, so it's my Azure Updates HTML snippet string. And because that's in a loop, that will basically copy those 2 steps for each of the SharePoint list items. Okay, so I get my 5 items in my list. And then once I've finished that apply to each loop, I go and add a closing div to my Azure Updates HTML string. So that gives me a HTML snippet for that part of the newsletter. I do exactly the same here for the Office 365 roadmaps HTML, and exactly the same for the Azure roadmap HTML, and they're just all run. Now, when they are all finished, this is one of my favorite features, is the ability to configure the run after. So when you do these parallel branches, you can actually set it so that the next step will only run after these items being successful. This is also where I would automatically regenerate the authentication token. So you could actually use it, and then if that fails, you could have another action in here that runs. If that action failed, that will go off get an authentication token. So this configure run after, this becomes very useful when you're doing error handling in your flows. So it's worth looking into that. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm getting into an expression. I do find I use expressions quite a lot. So this is where I'm still a bit and ahhing on how much of an IT pro feature flow is. I think it's getting there, but I'd like to see the expression handling a little bit neater just to make that accessible. I tend to write my expressions out in Visual Studio Code. I just find it easier to put them together. So all I'm doing here in this expression is I'm just using the replace command. So I'm just taking the variable from the email HTML template that we created before, and I'm just replacing that token with the HTML that we generated in those 3 loops. So I'm just going to replace the template Azure Updates with the Azure Updates HTML. Okay, because I nest these replace comments, that means I'm going to replace the resultant HTML of the first one and then replace Office 365 roadmap token with the HTML we generated in that Office 365 roadmap updates HTML snippet, and the same with Azure roadmap. So I just nest these in to replace those areas. And you can build this up as much as you want. Maybe if you have your header content, that's going to come back as well from SharePoint. You can make all the content fully dynamic and just build that. As you can imagine, that these can get quite complicated quite quickly. I did put a post up on my Medium about one of my expressions that got quite complicated, just processing date formats. So it'd be nice to have an easier way to edit these. So that's the expression we use. So that's generating my full newsletter HTML. I also need to encode this a little bit as well. So what happens is when I'm sending this up to Mailchimp through a HTTP post request, what's happening is the HTML is inside a string. So I have double quotes within my string of my post body. So I just need to encode it slightly. So all I'm doing here, I have some instances where I have where I encode my speech marks, my double quotes. But when that went up to Mailchimp, it failed slightly and gave me some rather funny HTML. So I realized I just needed to escape my escape character. So I just do a very simple encoding on it there. So again, another little expression that came in. So that's all that this section here does. And then once we've got our HTML ready for our campaign, we can actually go and send that to Mailchimp. So the first thing I do is I then just use the HTTP action. I want to use a post, so I go and refer to the developer documentation in Mailchimp to get my REST APIs. I do always create these in Postman first. So if you're doing anything directly with HTTP requests, I really recommend downloading a tool called Postman. You can mock up your request there, see what the result is, and then it makes it a lot easier to embed in here. So because I want to create a new template in Mailchimp, I use a post, and then that's the REST endpoint for creating a new template. I pass in some headers. One of the headers is authorization. In that authorization, I pass in the auth token. As I use variables here, so that if I need to change it, I only change it in one place at the start, and that automatically updates the rest of my flow. Content type, I'm telling it I want to send it some JSON, and then I send the body of my request. So I'm giving the template a name. I also put it in folders because I have different customers, so I put it into a folder in templates, and I pass in the HTML here. I'm not entirely sure what the limit is of a HTTP post body, but it definitely takes the HTML that I've generated above, so it is quite large. So I just pass in the HTML there. So actually it looks nice and simple. I don't have any advanced options. I just set authentication to none because I'm passing the authorization token in the header, so I don't need to do that. So when I send that request up to Mailchimp, that returns me some JSON. That JSON is the results. That gives me some information about the template I've just created. What I have to do in here is I put in the schema of the response that I'm going to get back. People like Mailchimp don't give you the schema, but what's nice is you have this little option down here, use sample payload to generate schema. So what I do, I go and mock up this request in Postman. That gives me my JSON response. I paste that live JSON response in here, and then Flow will automatically generate that schema for me from what it finds. So it tells me that the properties in the response, I'll have an ID, which is an integer. That ID I need later on, so I need to refer to the template when I create my campaign. So that parse JSON, really, really useful. Once that's successful, then it goes on and creates a campaign. So I just make another request to the campaigns endpoint, pass in the same access token, and I pass in the JSON I need to create a campaign. That easy. You go to the documentation, go to the API reference, and if you go to campaigns, it does tell you the format that you need to submit in here. So there are samples here. So it gets quite easy to generate these. Let's say example response. A lot of the options for Mailchimp are a bit frustrating. It kind of gives you CURL examples, so you just have to convert them to HTTP post JSON. So I just send in my recipients. So I find out my list. So I want to get that, send that to my specific list in Mailchimp. I want to send a regular campaign. I want to set the subject line. I do an expression here just to set the month and the year in the subject line of the email. Set the reply to the from name title, and then I pass in the template ID. So the parse JSON is nice because it means I can easily get the properties from the JSON that came back from my previous post. So I just pass in the template ID we got back. Again, I store it in a folder. I like to keep it nice and neat. Okay, that also returns me some JSON. So again, I'm interested in the campaign ID for the next step. So I just do another parse JSON. I post in my sample JSON here, and it generates a schema for me. And then once that's completed, I send a send request. Now, in reality, you might want to do some approval. So you could actually use the flow to send a test copy of the campaign. So maybe you want to send it to yourself for approval. You could do that quite easily. There's API endpoints for that as well. So you can send it yourself. Are you happy with this? Yes or no? Click yes, it will go and send it. Click no, then it will wait for you to make edits and send it yourself. So you can put a lot more intelligence in here if you want to. I guess it takes a brave person to dynamically create a newsletter and send it with no checking. But anyway, to send a campaign, I just pass in the campaign ID that we got in the previous one, and then actions/send, and that's all I need to do. And then that will tell Mailchimp to actually send that campaign. I don't want to keep the template for that one, so I go and delete it. So I send a delete a delete command to the template/template ID endpoint, and that will go and delete it from Mailchimp. The reason I don't want to keep that template is because it's very easy for me to get hold of. Once that campaign has been sent, it gives me the HTML source, so I don't need to keep a copy of it. So I can just delete it from my templates list. And that is how easy it is to dynamically create a template using SharePoint list items. And I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to send this now. It started successfully, that's always a bonus. I'll zoom out. I can see this running through. Nice updates. So lots of green ticks. I like green ticks. We've gone in. We've uploaded the template to Mailchimp. There's the JSON that I get back. So that's what I would paste into the schema editor. Pass it. Then I send my create campaign. Tells me what I sent up, my list ID, which should have my campaign ID in there as well. Sorry, my template ID. That gives me 200 response, which is good. That's completed. Send the campaign. Yeah, it looks like that's sent as well. And then it's gone and deleted the template, and that's been successful as well. So if I go into Mailchimp, look at campaigns, I can see that. So I go into the correct folder. There's I've got a monthly update, July 2018, and that has been sent just now. So 26th of July, 3:30 p.m. I haven't gone back in time. It's 3:30 p.m. where I'm in the UK. And I can go and see that campaign. And we have our HTML. It's not the most pretty campaign just yet, but we have the content in there from our SharePoint list. That's what I'm saying about formatting the date.
That's pretty nice.
That is how easy it is. Imagine doing that in code.
Well, you said it was like no code, low code. Effectively, you're developing, I think. You're building code here, but you're not typing in the commands. You're dropping them, but it's still, it reminds us, it requires the mind. No, but it requires the mindset of a developer, effectively, what you're putting off here. But I think it's brilliant, and it shows how Flow is turning into the glue between SharePoint and the rest of the world, effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I like the key points that you brought up on the different things like the parallel branches, the run after. I would highly recommend folks, if you haven't done that, especially the run after, to go look at it, because it's very powerful in terms of telling what to do and what not to do, and you could have error emails and stuff like that configured accordingly for a business. It's pretty powerful. Those two things are. Yeah,
I do that quite extensively. This flow here is a user onboarding. So just to show how easy it is, if you don't follow me on Twitter, this is one that I shared before. This is the user onboarding flow, and what we do in this is a flow where a user can fill in a Microsoft form. And then when it's successful, this will go and create the user in Stripe. It will create a subscription to a service in Stripe for billing purposes. It'll add them to Mailchimp, and it will also create them an Azure AD account so they can go and log into a web portal. All of that is done in Flow, and it also backs out. So I've got a method in here where I keep check of the steps that have been completed, so I can treat it a bit like a transaction. If one of those steps fails, I can go and back out all the previous ones as well later on. But just seeing how big some of these can get once they run, you can build some pretty complex items in here. When you get to this level, I highly recommend a 4K monitor and a super widescreen monitor. So yeah, you're building applications with virtually just a few expressions really, and not really much code. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Checks.
Yeah.
What do you have to share with us? And thank you.
Mark. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm going to share my screen. So for folks who didn't follow this week on Twitter, there was Microsoft Business Apps Summit here in Seattle that basically had Flow, Power Apps, and Dynamics team come and talk about their updates, and they had lots of sessions about what was new, some they announced this week, and sort of getting together how to using all of those tools together. So some interesting thing that came out this week was the support for flows in Excel. So if you have Excel web app or Excel, now you can add Flow as one of the add-ins. If you go to Office add-ins, and then if you go to the store, you can search for Flow and you can add this to your Excel. And this is preview right now, so things may not be working as good as possible, but it works most of the time and it's pretty neat. Now, this brings some interesting scenario, right? Now you can take the data in your Excel and put wherever you want. You can even create a campaign to Mailchimp, or you can even have a table and say create an item in SharePoint for a selected row and just run that flow right now here. What this would do is it basically will put this project 400 in my list in SharePoint. There you go. That is project 400. It even put my email to a person column right there. So it's pretty easy, and I think this opens up to a lot of scenarios, especially for SharePoint, given that Excel and SharePoint, usually people have this requirement for moving data back and forth. But the scenario is that you, let me see how to bring this. If you put the flow, if you add the add-in, and under the data tab, you'll have flow, excuse me. And then once you load it, if it's the first time you sign in, and then you get the option to choose a template that is very specifically designed for the ones that are available for Excel. And right there, the first template is create an item in SharePoint for a selected row. So if you just select that, and then you select continue, it'll now let you pick a table from your sheet. So here I have a table, so it'll give me that table, and then you can basically pick the site name and list name, and this will be exactly the same experience as what you would expect in the Flow site. So it's pretty powerful. If you haven't looked at it, I would highly encourage you to go look at what this can do, especially in lots of businesses where they use Excel. One of the other things I've seen in Twitter, but I've been really silent about this, there was a requirement in Power Apps for authors, the app builders, to go and republish their app every 6 months. Otherwise, the app would stop to work. Many people didn't really get this information because it was like a tiny little note in the documentation, but not something that was really pushed. And it was bad because, why would you even remember to go and republish the app? It should just work as it is. Now, the reason behind that was Power Apps is a continuously improving platform, and features get added every release or every week or every month. So to get those features into your app, you had to republish the app. Otherwise, the app stopped working. But I think now they are working on a much better solution, is that if you don't republish the app will still work, but you won't get any of the new features that you see announced in the blogs or for example, if there was a performance improvement that happened with the new update, you would have to republish your app to get those updates, right? So, but otherwise the app would still work. And they're trying to work on a mechanism where you can actually tell Power Apps to republish the app for every 6 months or things like that. But this is a very fine line that you need to draw. Whether do I let the tool handle all of this, or do I actually have to go and have a look at it whether things are working and then republish the app? I think now you have both of these options, given that automating the republishing is coming soon. So this is something everybody in Twitter everywhere became heated discussion. So I'm glad that Power Apps team has come up with something that you can manage how you republish your apps. So that was the two updates that I wanted to share. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, and I will leave the floor to Erwin and Paulo, I guess. Right, Erwin?
Yep, that was a great update, that last one. I found it pretty annoying that you had to republish an app every 6 months, so that's great that they came up with something there. Right, let me share the screen again. Let me see, where are we? there. And then Paolo and I will talk a bit about upcoming tenant scope provisioning capabilities in the PnP provisioning engine. Paolo.
Yep, here I am. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. So I would switch to the next slide just to start talking about what will come out in the very near future. Actually, we are working at the engine level. So first of all, at the schema level as usual, and then in the engine implementation to make it possible to provision not only a single site collection or a single site like we do nowadays, but more in general, a hierarchy of sites or a sequence or site, if we want to refer to the XML element we already have in the provisioning schema at tenant-wide. So basically you will be able to apply a provisioning template which will create and provision artifacts on multiple sites and site collection at once. And this will be, we think, really useful whenever you have kind of complex solutions which include multiple sites, as the starter kit, for example, in which we do have to provision the main communication site as well as a couple of modern team sites within a unique site hub. And the idea to being able to use the provisioning engine to do all this provisioning at once, we think will be really useful and will improve your productivity. At the same time,
yeah, I was thinking maybe explain why haven't we done this before? Because we always were explaining that the PnP provisioning engine only applied a template to a site, but you had to create the site collection yourself first. And now we're introducing or planning to introduce the ability to create a hierarchy of site collections through the engine. So it will actually create a site collection. And the main reason that we can do that now is the modern sites that take a few seconds to create compared to classic sites that can take up to 15 minutes to create. That is one of the reasons that we never really ventured off into that area with the old site collections.
Precisely, and I totally agree with you. On the other side, we should still think, and maybe we can even share some thoughts with all the other people in this call about what shall we do if we want to provision a hierarchy of sites which includes classic sites. Because in that case, it will take a while to do the creation, to create the site collection, and then the provisioning can be fast or slow depending on how many artifacts you want to provision. But the creation of the classic site will for sure take a while. So we need to think about it. We can just make it possible to create hierarchies of modern sites, which is one option, but I don't know if this is the good one, and having some feedback from the people in this call, I think, would be really, really useful and appreciated. And on the other side, we need to think how to manage a provisioning of a hierarchy of different flavor of sites. So feel free to use the chat area, or maybe right after this short talk by me and Darwin, we can just do an open mic session in which you can ask your questions about Core and PowerShare in general, but specifically you can even give us some feedback about these upcoming changes, if you like.
There's a remark here from Benoit. He says, and we will be able to set the language and time zones. I would love that. The challenge is it's not that we don't want to do it, it's just that we are talking to an API that is provided to us. I mean, we don't work at Microsoft, we don't build SharePoint. So we're just consumers, just like you are. And if Microsoft builds it, we will implement it, no problem. It will be in the engine. But right now, yeah, unfortunately.
As long as there is an API to do something, we can do that. But if we don't have the API, unfortunately, we can't.
Yeah, user voice is one. The other one would be the SPDev docs issues list.
Yeah. And
yes.
Back on the upcoming changes, one other upcoming change that we are thinking about, no, I will stay on the previous slide just for a while, if you don't mind, Erwin, is the idea to use the PMP package file. Most likely, you know that we support XML provisioning files, somehow JSON provisioning files, as well as .pmp package files, which are open XML files in which we can store the provisioning template, as well as all of the artifacts like files to upload, images, and stuff like that, CSS, and so on and so forth. Well, we are thinking about using the same PMP package file to store also multiple templates as well as multiple SPPKG SharePoint Framework packages, so that it will be possible to have just a unique .pmp file to do the full provisioning of a hierarchy of site targeting a tenant. And again, we think it will be really useful and powerful from a deployment perspective. But again, we are really open to feedback from you guys. So if you think it's not useful, or if you would like to do it differently, just let us know. We can talk about it, and we can try to find the best solution for all of us, for the community. Yeah. So those are the main pillars of the changes that will come out, I would say, pretty soon, because the target is to make it possible to achieve some new functionalities in the starter kit by Ignite, which will be in late September, if I'm not mistaken. So it will take a couple of months from now to have all of these capabilities available. Hopefully, that's our plan. We'll see, but we will try to do our best to reach the goal. Right, Erwin?
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll try. I think we come pretty far. Yeah. So the main story about this is that we want to have a single file format, so it makes it very easy distributable. You don't have to handle 5 XML files, 3 SPPKG files, a hierarchy file, etc., etc. Just one package. You apply that type of package, and your site structure, including the design, is up and running. That's the whole idea behind it.
It will be in hot August, but for us at least. But
yes,
in the south of Italy, we are used to it. I don't know in the north of Europe,
in Sweden, we're not really used to that. No.
Okay, you will become used to it. Okay, so I would move to the next one if you don't have anything else to add on this topic, Erwin. No. So as I said, all these new capabilities are targeting the SharePoint Starter Kit V2, we could say, because we are thinking about providing a tenant automated deployment of the Starter Kit. So the idea that we have in our mind is to make it possible for you or for anybody else to install the Starter Kit just browsing to a website, which will be under the SharePoint PMP URL. We still don't know which will be the name, but something starterkit.sharepointpmp.com or something like that. And through that website, you will simply have to grant the permissions for your tenant to the application, to the Azure AD application, multi-tenant Azure AD application that we are creating, to make it possible for that application to do the automated provisioning of the Starter Kit for you in your tenant. Of course, this will imply that you will have to grant quite a high level of permissions to that application, but you should trust it and should trust us, and we will use this functionality to make it possible not only to do the initial provisioning, but maybe most likely not by September, not by the end of September, but in the future, maybe also to provide you the capability to update your tenant. So you go back to the site and you decide to upgrade to the latest and greatest version of the Starter Kit, and having proper permissions granted to the app, we will be able to do it for you. So it will leverage the tenant level hierarchy provisioning. It will leverage the capability to create site collection, modern site collections on the fly. And we think it will be really interesting, especially if you want to do a demo for a customer and you want to set up the Starter Kit on the fly in a matter of few minutes, just registering your tenant and granting the permissions.
And if you because we do ask for a lot of rights in your tenant. If you don't really trust us, it's all open source. You can have a look at it, and if that still doesn't convince you, you can actually get the open source and run it on your own. That's totally okay. You don't have to use the PnP hosted version. It just makes your life easier, we think.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, I wouldn't trust Erwin neither, so I would understand this kind of behavior. So you can just download the source code and do it on your own website. And it will be a sample. I was kidding, of course, just for fun. But it's a great, I think it's a great sample also if you want to create such kind of solution for your own provisioned site or customizations, because you can always download the source code, copy what we do, and automate the provisioning of your own solution using the same approach.
Exactly.
And I think that's it. Yeah, and no more PowerShell.
That makes me kind of sad for obvious reasons. But,
we know that for some people, having a PS1 file to execute targeting the tenant, doing the authentication and all the stuff can be somehow complex or not so friendly, at least. That's why we decided to have a more friendly solution, easy to use also for not technical people, let me say, or for less technical people.
Exactly. And it opens interesting scenarios, for instance, like say you're a consultant, you work for a customer and you want to have a discussion about a certain site. You just provision that site to your tenant and there is it. Because we will allow you to make, that's the idea at least, that we will allow you to make changes before you provision a template. So we allow you to change the theme and the title and the URLs and all those things. It will not be a hard-coded package that will be provisioned out to your tenant. No, we allow you, before it's actually provisioned, we allow you to make changes to its content, upload a new theme file, etc., etc. And then so you can customize the end result without writing a single line of code. That is the idea behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, any feedback, any idea around this topic? What do you want to share with us to let us know if we can do it better or we can do something different?
There's a question for Gautam here. He says, like, in this scenario, how will you go about the custom user profile property that we need for the footer links? Well, it's a very valid point, and we would have to solve that in a different way. And I know that, Paolo, you're working on that, aren't you?
Yeah, I was working on a solution which actually will not be the right one, unfortunately, because we were planning to use a custom list in the OneDrive personal site of every single user to store the information. Unfortunately, we can't access that site collection using the SharePoint endpoint of the Microsoft Graph. So we would need to use a different approach through CSOM and some other stuff, and I'm still trying to figure out if there is a smart solution, because it would have been really useful to being able to use the graph to access through the SharePoint and the sites endpoint of the Microsoft Graph the OneDrive for Business Site collection. But unfortunately, we can't do that. And we cannot even fix it because it's a problem on the API side, or a feature rather than a problem on the Graph API side. So I'm still working on it, but I'm trying to figure out an alternative approach to still reach the same result, which maybe will be to use a custom list in the OneDrive personal site of every single user, so that we don't need to create the user profile property.
Yeah, and to answer Chris' remark, he says he would love to have checkboxes for individual components. Yeah, we are planning to do that. So we show you what kind of components are in the package by most likely parsing the SPPKG file, or I'm not sure yet how we will approach that, but and then allow you to say, okay, I want this, I don't want that, I want this, I don't want that. So you can really customize the end result.
Yeah, again, having a .pmp package file in which we can store multiple PMP XML templates will make it possible to select which component you want to activate in your target site, and so we will selectively be able to apply just those templates that we want to have, which will include, of course, the corresponding components. So yes, the idea is to give you a list once you authenticate and you provide us the grant. We provide you a list of the components, and you will tick those that you want to have activated in the site that will be created.
Here's a question for you, Paolo. How is it possible? All the questions actually are for you. No. How is it possible to create SharePoint Starter Kit site collection using Azure application and application permission scope, as it is not possible now? Only delegated permissions are possible. Is that correct?
Well, actually, we will use a delegated access token and not an application-only token. So when you will go to the website and you will authenticate and give us the grant, we will store a refresh token for your account that we can use to do the provisioning stuff on the back end, and we can even use it to refresh another access token to do the update. Of course, the refresh token will last after 3 months, if I'm not mistaken, 90 days to be sharp. And so, as it happens with many other solutions targeting Office 365, you will have to come back on the website in order to let us refresh the refresh token. Sorry for the trick of words.
Yeah. And that's so indeed, only administrators would be able to deploy this. Correct.
Yeah.
But that does also mean we need access to like the managed metadata service and all kinds of other things that are tenant scoped anyway. So yeah. Yeah, Patrick or Patrick, hi Patrick, long time no see, asks if there's any work in progress code available for this. Currently not. It's that early, that's why Paolo made the reference that it's going to be a very, very warm August. We have some work left here. So no, currently not. I think what we'll do, but I'm not 100% sure yet, we didn't really talk that through, is that we will first make something to work, and then we will publish a repo in the dev branch, and then we start to take it from there. But the first publish will probably be something that already has a certain state of quality in it.
And right now we are still working at the schema and at the engine level. Even if I have a prototype which does the provisioning at tenant level, uses this refresh token and all the stuff we talked about.
If you go to the schema today, if you're interested in that, there's a schema repo. And in that schema repo, you will find that there's actually something called a sequence. It's already in there. It's been there for years. Basically almost from day one. And that has been that was created based on really great feedback we had from Victor Willian at the time. That is something we plan to sort of reuse. It will not necessarily be identical in what is there right now, but that was a part of the PNP provisioning engine that is, or the schema that has never been implemented. But it is in the schema. And it will be something like that, allowing you to create a hierarchy of sites, apply a template to a specific site, etc., etc. I mean, the technology has changed, the ecosystem has changed with the new solution packages. So we will probably have to update that a bit and modify it a bit, and we have other properties and in some parts less properties we can set. So we have to tweak it a bit here and there. But that's what we're going to work on. So you can already have a look at that part of the schema. See where
it will get slightly updated, but it's the basic that we are starting from. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We have 2 minutes left. Did we make it in time? I think we did.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
That's
well, I think on our side that's it. So if there are more. Don't tell Lisa. If there are more questions or feedback, we will keep it as a secret.
Will see the recording. He will see the recording and he can learn from it, maybe.
Maybe he is in this call, even if he's on vacation, because...
No, I was actually thinking of letting my Skype crash just for now, because everyone is so used to it. So maybe I should make my Skype crash. But yeah, no, everything went okay. So thank you for today. I hope you all enjoy your summertime and that it is not too warm like it is in Sweden right now. We're suffering 35 degrees, and I call that suffering indeed. So enjoy your time. Thank you for today, and thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jax.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Patrick, for recording, and see you next time.